On that particular day, I was at work. I used to work over at KPMG up in Montvale, New Jersey, and I was actually about to go into a seminar that I was presenting for what's called international assignees, people that were flying into the United States to work on, in projects throughout the country and all that sort of stuff. So I remember I got into the office early that morning. It was around 7 o'clock in the morning, and then our meeting started around 9 o'clock. And I recall where the building is. There's this lunch area, quote unquote lunch area, that I had to walk through from my office over to the conference rooms. And I remember just seeing the television, in the corner over there. And this was after the first plane hit, which was the building my brother was in, the North Tower. And I remember just looking over at the TV, and I saw that there was there's something going on at the towers. I didn't really, it said plane hits the tower. So it seemed at that moment was still presumed there was like some sort of a small, prop plane that hit or something like that. So I looked over, and then I kind of just kept going because I was running over to the meeting. I wasn't even aware that my brother was in the towers because he had only started working at Cantor Fitzgerald, I believe, mid-August. So only a couple of weeks earlier. So I wasn't even aware that he was there. I knew he was down, in the Wall Street area generally, but I didn't even know he was over at the, on the 105th up there. So went into the meeting, went through my meetings, and then we had a break around 45 minutes later. And, again, this was before smartphones, but people still had their phones, texts were coming in. And around 45 minutes, around 9:45, we took a break, and, we walked outside. And again, outside in the area, there was a television, and suddenly we walked out and there was just, 30 people just glued to the TV watching what was happening. So everyone all of a sudden came of interest. And we had people, foreign nationals into the US, that I was just doing presenting a seminar for them. They were all in a bit of shock too. They didn't understand what was going on as well. So we just sat there. And at that moment, for whatever strange reason, I contacted my wife now, who was my girlfriend at the time. I contacted her and I said, do me a favor, get in touch with Chrissy, which was my sister-in-law. I said, just find out where Gino is. Because I wasn't sure, I'm like, find out where Gino is. So she went ahead and did that. We all went back into our meeting, and then like 20 minutes later, not even 20 minutes later, like 10 minutes later, I get a text from my wife, and she basically says Gino was in, it was in the towers. We still didn't know which tower he was in. She just knew he was in the tower. She wasn't aware if he was in North or South Tower and all that. And then from there, I started getting a little bit like, what's going on here? I texted him. I hadn't heard anything back. You know what I mean? And then from there, kind of everyone was very restless. Let's put it that way. And so we decided to wrap up the meeting early. About 20, 30 people there. And then from there, I basically, got in touch with my mother and parents. I got in touch with my wife. Still hadn't heard anything from Gino. Hadn't spoken to Chrissy. So at that point, we were just under the impression, because my father was a dental technician at a lab in Brooklyn. So he was actually stopped at the Goethals and was sent back, and was stopped on the turnpike in the Kearney area, and basically was watching the towers burn, and he watched as the towers fell. You know what I mean? So, at that point, I jumped in my car, because I think, then at one point, I finally got in touch with Chrissy, and Chrissy said, Gino was absolutely in one of the towers, and one of the towers that fell. I haven't heard from him and all that sort of stuff. So I jumped in the car. I, flew home. It was like 20, 25-minute drive. And then from there, I was just kind of hanging with my parents at my parents' house. Chrissy was there. Rebecca, who at that time that's my wife. She was in New York as well, down in I think she was at the 33rd, roughly, I believe, 33rd, around there. So she had a pretty good shot of what was going on, and then that was difficult to get people out of the city at that point. So we were trying to get her out. So she finally got out. And then we were all congregated at my parents' house. And at that point, then we're contacting, local police and trying to figure out what's going on. We hadn't heard anything. other friends like Tim Finnerty, who passed as well. He was my brother's good friend. He was the one who actually was able to, he brought my brother into Cantor. And interestingly, at the plot in North Arlington, Holy Cross, they're right next to each other. They never identified Timmy, but they did identify Gino. A couple of months later. That day, to be honest with you, Shelley, that day was just like it was almost like a dream in a sense. You know what I mean? All day long we're on the phone with police. We wanted to see if we could get into the city. They won't let anybody in, obviously, that day. So we're on my cousin at the time. He was good friends with the local police chief in Lyndhurst, and he was letting Rich know all the information. We're going back and forth, and then I remember that particular, was it that day? I think it was that day or the day after. But I remember that particular day, like we just it felt surreal. That's the best way to say it. It just felt surreal. I remember just watching. That's when they started. That's when CNN and all of them started with the chyrons at the bottom. Even before that, we never saw that. So all the information that was coming in, we were just glued to the TV at that point, just trying to figure out what's going on. And then we heard, from Tim's father that Timmy had contacted Tim Sr., and he said, we're getting out. Gino's with me, we're getting out. And that was the last they had heard. So, the tower collapsed and all that. They were, from what we gathered, we believe they were probably in the fire, in the stairs, essentially. Chrissy, actually, my former sister-in-law, she did speak to my brother very briefly. I'm sorry, she didn't speak to my brother. No. Chrissy spoke to, because my brother was a bond trader. Chrissy spoke to a bond trader in Europe who had just been on the phone recently with my brother. Right when the plane hit, he said something happened. Emergency lights, smokes everywhere. We're gonna have to get out of here. And that was the last someone actually had heard from Gino. Like I said, Timmy spoke to his father, so we got some info there. And by the end of the evening and all that, you just start you worry. And we kind of all just kind of fell asleep literally on my parents' living room floor, just watching TV. And then 4 o'clock, and I remember waking up about 3-4 in the morning, just like, is this real what just happened? You know what I mean? I was just like, is this real what just happened? And just had this sort of malaise of like, what's going on? Is my brother going to come home or not? So then the next day, I think some people put up some sort of a website or something that says, I forget what it was, trying to find people. And then the website had an error in it where if you type someone's name in, that name would get on the list of people that have been found. And I remember my cousin came along and says, I found him, he's okay. I'm like, what? And then I'm looking at it, and it read, what's it called? It read G.G. Calvi, which is not, my brother's official name was Luigi. So a nickname when he was young in Italian is Gigi. And he hated that name. And there's no way he would have given that name out. It would have either been Gino or, his less, as he said, less ethnic sounding Gene. It had something to do with it. But, when I saw that, I kind of was suspicious. I'm like, he would never have said his name is Gigi. You know what I mean? So, that gave my parents just a interim, hope, and which, they were let down within a couple hours after that. But, after that, it was just, it was funerals, and it was, commemorations, and it was this, that, and, going to church a lot, and sitting down with priests and all that sort of stuff. And just the, the general, it wasn't so much, people lose people every day, but it was just the size of the way in which it occurred. It was just something that, for about a month, it was a good month. I took about a month off of work just because work was great. They said, hey, take the time, and, got a lot of things. My brother was a very responsible person, so he had a lot of his affairs in order, so I was helping my sister-in-law with all that sort of stuff. And, and once we found out in February, I remember my wife and I, we hadn't gone away or anything like that, for a little bit of time. We finally we were taking a little trip to Virginia, and it was in February. Yeah. And like a couple of days before that, the medical examiner gives us a call, and asked if we had any, any kind of like toothbrushes, hairbrush or anything that, probably had some DNA on it. And that was at that point, this was like 3 days before we were going to go away. And I just said to, Rebecca, I'm like, they must have identified something and they just want to confirm based on additional information that we could give them. So, and then, but then a day or two after we got down to Virginia, that's when Chrissy calls me. That was his wife at the time. And she said they identified Gino, they gave her the, what they had identified, a piece of skull, piece of femur, just not a lot, but, that at least gave us some solace in the fact that, we identified him. And then, we had, we originally had some ceremonies, back in late September, but then, once they identified him and everything, we had set up we hadn't set up the plots or anything yet. And my mom and dad, it's interesting. We have both a plot, for him, but then my mother's an old world Italian thinking. And, she didn't want him to be buried. She wanted him in the mausoleum. So his casket is actually in the mausoleum over Holy Cross in North Arlington, while we have a headstone where all the other 9/11, first responders, everybody kind of that they sectioned off for them. So, we were lucky enough so that we were able to open up, even though there was nothing in it, we were able to open up the mausoleum and then, put the casket with his remains back in there and close that back up. So we had the, ceremony for that. And, and then life, continues, and you always have the thoughts, and I'm married now with kids and all that. They've never met him and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of, it's unfortunate. You get to, they see pictures of him, they know the story. We've gone to the memorials and all that, and it still hurts. It's still something to think about. You kind of sit there and say, hey, it would be nice to continue to have your life with him and together as a family, but you move on, and hopefully things, one day I'll see him again. That's the way I think about it. It's just Barry. I think you spoke to Barry. Barry's, Barry and Gino, they were, fraternity brothers. I've known Barry for 35 plus years, and Barry he's been great in the whole thing. He's kind of, not to say stepped in as a brotherly figure, but Gino and Barry were close, and his other friends. I've stayed very close with his good buddies from college and all that sort of stuff. So we get together every once in a while. I think I got that all the way up there from University of Buffalo. That's where he went to school, and and they did a ceremony for him up there. So it's been tough. A lot of times I feel alone, even though I have a sister, but that's a different issue. But my brother and I were pretty close, so it's kind of tough occasionally. I sit there and I think about him every once in a while. I wish he was around to see, his nephew and his niece, and sort of impart, because my brother was very, Gino was a very methodical, straight-minded individual, and incredibly organized and all that sort of stuff. And having his exposure to them would have been a nice thing for them. So I try to emulate that, and in a sense for them, but it's not the same. And it's stuff like that you think about. My parents, my mom's still basically, well, not recently because my father's going down the dementia road and my mother had some surgeries, but basically every Sunday she would go over, because they're in Lyndhurst and North Arlington's right next door. Every Sunday they'd go over to the cemetery. So she tries to get there now. Even my father can't drive anymore and all that. So, but my dad was having some trouble with it for a period of time. But ultimately, my thoughts of him are always good. They've always been good, and everything I've always tried to impart to my kids about him has always been in a positive sense. And they have been, like my brother and I, we had a great relationship, and, I knock on wood, for whatever reason, I don't want to say life has been good, but it hasn't been bad. And I appreciate everything I have, and how healthy my family is and all that. And I think part of it has to do with him watching over us. It's ever since his passing, it's I kind of feel almost in myself guilty that that I've had to enjoy, marriage and kids and a good career and all that sort of stuff. And he was going down that path, and you never get to experience the kids. He got married young, but he didn't get to experience, being a father and all that stuff. So, it's stuff like that. Stuff that,
How old was Gino at the time?
34. He was 34. I was just turning, 2001, early 2000. September 2001. So I had just turned 30, and Gino was 34. Yep, 67. He was born in. Yep.
And at what point did your family know that he was lost?
I think definitely by the third day. We all kind of felt, okay, there's we hadn't heard from hospitals. The police chief in Lyndhurst was calling around. He was calling into, the local hospitals and NYPD, any way in which they could possibly find out if anyone's in any hospital or anything like that at all. And after, 2 days, there was just no indication of him at all. So, and that was, so I would say I came to the conclusion, by the next day, because knowing my brother, he was resourceful, so he would have gotten in touch with somebody, Chrissy, somebody, and I kind of felt it by the end of the day, basically by the end of that day, because no one had heard anything. And, but then the next day came along with a whole website that was set up. And then, by the third day, we just knew, obviously, there's no way he survived. I remember at that time, Giuliani was, he was in the papers saying how, they're fearing 10,000+ dead and all that. So, we kind of, saw the writing on the wall, we always kept up hope. But then by the third day, we were basically, we were resigned to the fact that he was gone. And, from there is when we started to, take care of preparations, try to help out Chrissy and all that. She was by herself. It's both a good thing and a bad thing in a sense. They didn't have, they were married a good 9 years. They hadn't had any children, and my sister had just recently gotten married. She had a baby, and my brother wasn't a big, my brother wasn't a big fan of kids, but I think his friends, his good, his fraternity buddies and all of them, they were all, having kids and all that. And my sister, and I think he was finally warming up to the whole concept. And it would have been nice, if my kids had some cousins, from him, but they never went down that path. So it's both good in a sense, quote unquote, they didn't lose their father. But at the same time, it's also kind of sad that, there was essentially no legacy left over. Chrissy was around for a few more years after that. And then I think around 2005, I believe she settled down in a sense. She moved back up to her hometown of Auburn, New York, where her family was. It made sense. And I think, we've kept in touch a little bit over time. We've kind of not so much lost touch. We haven't touched in a couple of years, but she got remarried and had she always wanted a family, which was great. And she started a family and all that. So it would have just been nice to have some legacy of his, other than just photos and memories and stuff like that.
Is there anything else you want to add?
Just in general, obviously we're watching everything, all the lunacy that's going on in the past year, now. And I look back at that time, and honestly, I would love to have his, his counsel. That's one of the things I really miss. I went from having an older, smarter, very well-educated brother, as a guide, and then kind of in a sense been on my own, So, and one of the biggest things is I just kind of miss him, and how our families would have been, vacationing doing family things. I think he would have eventually decided to start a family, and obviously, right before. It was interesting because this was in September, and the winter before, my brother and I used to be, I used to ski a lot. He used to ski a lot, and we went skiing back in the winter of I think it was like February of 2001, a few months earlier. And that's when I had already been with Rebecca for about a year and a half or so. 2 years roughly, and I was just talking to him about getting married and engaged and all that. And he was telling me how how much he liked her, and just stuff like that. That's what I miss. Ultimately, that's what I miss. I miss that. Having that brother, the older brother. That's about it.
Well, I thank you, Alex, for sharing your memories, and I know it was very painful, and
Yeah,
I'm grateful for you doing that.
I appreciate it. I'm glad. I'm glad I got to talk. I really don't. I'll be honest with you. I don't talk much about it, but Barry's the one who said, "Hey, why don't you?" Like, okay, but I don't. Oftentimes when people hear, I lost my brother, they always, sorry. I'm the kind of person that kind of says, thank you. It's been a while. So, we've been able to, work through it and all that sort of stuff. But I really never talk much about it. Just being a guy, I guess, But I appreciate the opportunity that, for the call.
Thank you, Alex.